You're listening to Beyond the Measure, episode 34. Listen as I, a young choir director, and my husband, a young composer, interview other music educators in order to gain insight into their own success in the classroom. We have a lot to learn, and we want you to learn with us. No matter your age, ensemble, or experience, this is the ideal podcast for music educators, composers, and students alike. So join us as we go beyond the measure.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Measure. My name is Christian, and I'm a young composer. I'm not here with my wife, Kara, at the moment for this intro, but she is here during the full-on interview today. If this is your first time joining us for this podcast, this is a show where my wife and I, we just interview as many different music educators that we can just to learn all of the kinds of tips and advice that they have to provide for us, and hopefully that will also be beneficial to you as the listener. We're here in 2024. It's been a happy new year. We took a little break over Christmas and the new year before we got to uploading more episodes again, but we're really excited to get going again. I hope 2024 is a great year for you and that you've already started strong with that. I don't want to take too much more time with this intro, so I'll get right into telling you about our guest for today. We have Mrs. Andrea Cruz, who is the choir director at Caprock High School in Amarillo, Texas. Let me read you her bio so you can hear a little bit more information about her. So Mrs. Cruz is in her 17th year of teaching and 16th year as head choral director at Caprock High School. She holds an associate in music from Amarillo College and a bachelor of music education from West Texas A&M University. Before coming to Caprock, Mrs. Cruz taught choir at Bowie Middle School. During Mrs. Cruz's time at Caprock, the varsity mixed choir earned their first sweepstakes in school history for the choral program in 2013, followed by the first sweepstakes for the varsity tenor bass and treble choirs in 2014. Mrs. Cruz has been married to her husband, Ricardo, for 20 years. Mr. Cruz teaches at Humphreys Highland Elementary, teaches private guitar lessons, and plays for the local community theater. They have two beautiful girls, Ava and Santana. Music is what brought them together, and they continue to spread the love of music through their students and children. I'm a big fan of that, spreading music with your spouse. As I'm sure you can probably tell from this podcast, that's something we're big fans of. So this is a great conversation that we had with Andrea. And again, I say this in a lot of episodes, but even though she comes from a choral background, everything that we talk about in this episode can be applicable to any sort of music education, or honestly, any sort of teaching classroom setting in general, I'd say, especially for this one, because she really talks a lot about her journey coming into a position of teaching music. And I always say this as well, but it's so beneficial to hear the differences in stories from director to director on how they got to be where they are today. And she has a very interesting story on how she got there and some of the hiccups she had to go through in order to get there, which you'll hear about in the interview. But she also provides lots of great examples on what you can do to prepare for teaching on a daily, weekly, monthly basis going into the school year. So I think this is going to be very beneficial no matter what point in the school year you are at right now, or if you're getting ready to teach for the first time, or even if you've been teaching for many, many years. So this was a great conversation for me and Kara to be a part of, and I'm really excited for you to hear it as well. So without further ado, here is our interview with Mrs. Andrea Cruz. Andrea, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. We really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
Yeah, so could you start by just kind of telling us and all of our listeners kind of, who you are, what you do right now, and how you just came to do music as your career and how you got to where you are now?
Absolutely. So I am the head director at Caprock High School in Amarillo, Texas. This is my 16th year here, 17th year teaching. My first year I taught at Bowie Middle School, which is actually one of my feeders. I got into music because I was a show choir kid in high school, and I loved it. And, I got to spring semester of my senior year and was like, what am I going to do? And so the local community college had some auditions, and I went and auditioned and got a full scholarship back when they still did that, and decided to do music. So got into being a music major that way. I was a 3-year community college student because I just loved being there so much. And then that's kind of where the story goes a little askew. I finished my associate's degree, and we were going to move to Lubbock because that was the closest place that had guitar, and my husband's a guitar player. He had finished his associates a year before I did, at the same college. He worked full time for a year before we got married. Got married after I finished my associates, and we were going to go to Texas Tech and do music. Unfortunately, my voice teacher here did not think that I should be a music major. I guess she did not want me representing her. So I'm going to keep it as PC as I can. And long story short, she called ahead before I even got to audition. And I was not accepted into tech as a music major. So we got down there. I was obviously devastated. I don't think I knew how devastated I was until we started going through the year. So I went to see my advisor. The advisor was confused because all of my grades from the community college were, all A's, B's, and a couple of C's for music history, but we won't talk about that. And she said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I know I want to teach." I was part of the Amarillo Opera Arts and Outreach program. And it was a summer program where they had college kids come in and run little camps throughout the community. We did many operas, many musicals. And I was part of that program for several years under the direction of Mila Gibson. She was a great mentor to us. It was a great program. Honestly, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my teaching until I got through that mentor program. And I was like, okay, I'm going to teach. Honestly thought I was going to teach the littles and be an elementary director. So, the advisor said, "Well, what else are you good at?" And I was like, "Well, I'm pretty good at math." So I went for math education for a year at Tech. I was absolutely miserable. Math is one of those things that I'm good at, but I can't teach it because I don't understand how people don't understand it. So, we spent about that year. I was driving back to Amarillo every weekend. I was just absolutely miserable, cried every time my husband brought home his music homework. It was just ridiculous. So he finally said to me, I had come back for something for my sister. My younger sister is also a musician. And she was still in high school at the time. And he just said, "What if you come back to WT? You have friends at WT, talk to them." So they got me in touch with Dr. Bob Hansen. And he got me an audition, and I auditioned. They got me into the School of Music, and I spent 4 more years finishing there. Three. One at Tech and then 3 at WT. And Dr. Bob was my voice teacher. I probably owe him millions of dollars in therapy sessions, but he got me through it. And here I am. So, I decided during my student teaching is when I decided that I was not an elementary teacher. I got to teach with this master teacher, Jody Johnson. She's absolutely phenomenal. She's still teaching. And she is this master of combining Orff and Kodai. Those are two things that shouldn't work together, but man, she makes it happen. And I absolutely love teaching with her. But I think I realized my personality wasn't quite cut out for those elementary kids. And then I went on to my secondary student teaching with Brandon Farron at Canyon High School. And I really fell in love with the high school level. And so I decided I was going to go secondary after that experience. So, that's it in a nutshell.
That's a great story. Just, I think, for anyone to hear. We've already gotten this impression, over and over again. I mean, the route you take to becoming a music director is not always as straightforward as you think it's going to be, or it's not even the original path you wanted to do. And some people have just ended up there. I remember when we interviewed Jason Jones from San Angelo. He talked about how he wasn't even originally, he was just a music minor, and that wasn't necessarily his plan. He was going to be a coach, and he ended up in a band director position, and now that's what he's been doing all these years, and he's loved it. And then on the flip side, I think it's great to hear your story where that was always what you were wanting to do, and it wasn't as straightforward as a path to get there. Unfortunately, honestly, I think as it should have been. but you got there nonetheless. So I think that's incredible.
Yeah, I think it bleeds over into how I teach, why I teach. It's definitely a motivating factor. I like to say I fight for the underdog sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned you said you student taught with Brandon Farron, is that right?
I did, yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Very
way
cool.
back when.
That's awesome. I was just curious because we interviewed Brandon a few episodes ago. So if you're listening and you haven't
Oh,
heard that,
cool,
you should go
cool.
back and hear that. But kind of going off of that, then I kind of want to just hear your thoughts a little bit more on, and especially because you said you like to root for the underdog a lot and times like that. For anyone listening, whether they are just now graduating high school, going into college, or they are going through college, or maybe they've even already gotten a huge chunk of their degree done, and maybe they're in a weird situation, kind of like what you were in, it just feels like they can't quite make it to the goal that they've set for themselves. What would you say for someone in that kind of situation?
I think first I would say you've got to keep going. It's not all going to happen at once. There's not a switch that happens. You don't graduate and get that degree and then things are, rainbows and unicorns. That's not how successful things happen in anything, honestly, in anything in life. I often tell my kids, they're like, I want to be a choir director. And so I encourage them to be part of TFME or make sure they're doing AP music theory. And I'm like, you have to love music so much that you have to dissect it to the point that you almost hate it sometimes and then put it back together so that you understand it and have a different love for it. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles for these music majors is they get in thinking it's going to be, I loved choir. It was so much fun. They don't understand all the inner workings and all the background work that goes into what we do. And I think being a part of things like TFME, especially, or if you're already in college and you're in a slump, go find a teacher out in the field that you can go sit with. Don't do observation hours to check off something on your degree. Go do observation hours to better yourself. And I'm going to challenge folks that are feeling down and feeling discouraged to stop and think, what is it that I can do better so that I feel better about what I'm doing? I feel better about myself as a director. And how can I just take one step forward? Don't fix everything. Don't try to be that director that you look up to. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we make sometimes is we go, I'm going to be so-and-so. My program's going to be like this school. No two programs are the same. Even if they're in the same communities, it's not ever the same. They're different kids. They're different people in front of them. So you've got to find a way to make it your own. The flip side of that is also, take what you can from the people that are being successful. Surround yourself with people who are going to support you, truly support you and root for you. Take the time to sit down with you and talk through some of those difficult things, give you good pointers, maybe even come sit in your class. You've got to be vulnerable. You've got to take ego out of what we do. I think ego is the number one thing that takes some of our folks out of this field is they're not willing to look at what they're doing wrong. It's always everything outside of them. And I am a true believer in that it is not the kids. It's sometimes administration, but with that, I'm going to say I have awesome administration. And I think that's one of the things that keeps me going. That's a separate conversation.
Sure.
But I really don't think it's the kids. I think it's how we interact with the kids and find a way to connect with them. For the most part, there's always exceptions, but you're always going to have those kids that want to be there. And we just got to find a way to make them successful in the setting that we're in.
Let's take a quick break from this episode so that I can tell you about this podcast's primary sponsor, Christian Fortner Music. That's right, my own music business. If you're looking for fresh new music ranging anywhere from middle school choir to college level orchestra, there's a good chance I'll have it. And while I am a young composer, my music library is constantly growing as I write more and more. The way I sell the music is a little different from other music retailers as well, which I think you'll like. Instead of purchasing a minimum number of individual copies or parts, you'll purchase one PDF that includes all parts in it, of which you can print out as many times as you need. That way, you don't have to stress about purchasing a new part that you misplaced or feel the shame of only purchasing 10 copies for your ensemble of 40. Come on, we've all done it before. Now, if you'd like a sample of what my music is like, you can actually receive a completely free piece of music from a certain selection when you sign up for my mailing list. Plus, you'll be a part of other fun perks, such as receiving monthly updates from me and early access to podcast episodes such as this one. If that's something you'd be interested in receiving, you can do so at christianfortnermusic.com/mailings. Well, a couple big things you pointed on there. First of all, I love what you said about one thing at a time, right? It's so
Yes.
easy. And I think I know I can relate to this as a composer. Kara, I know you can relate to it as a teacher. Whatever it is you do, it's so easy to see all of these things you have to do that are, before you. And you feel like, you want to, but you feel like and many times you feel like you have to conquer all of it at once. And that's just not how it works. It just won't work. And it's when you try to take all of those things on at once, well, that's when you get what we call stress, right? And
Yes.
and so I'm not saying this is only always the case, but there can be outside factors out of our control, which can happen a lot. But at the end of the day, stress is either brought upon ourselves from trying to do that, or like you said, sometimes we are dealt with cards that are hard for us to handle, but at the end of the day, it's up to us to decide how we're going to respond to what we've been dealt. And I was actually just listening to a message from a pastor the other day, and he was talking about how stress, you can't make stress go away, but you can choose how to respond to stress, and that's ultimately what makes a difference in how we work with that. And I once heard it this way: is you may not always be responsible, but you're always response able. So you can always respond to stress in a way that's going to be best for you.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
I kind of wanted to go back to you saying it's not always the students, but it's kind of figuring out how to interact with them and relating to them in that way. I've found that this is my third year teaching and my second year at my campus. And last year was, I would say, now that I'm looking back at it, I think my second year was worse than my first year teaching overall. And it's because I didn't know the kids. I was getting to know them, and they were getting to know me. They still missed, their former choir director. And so coming back this year, it's just been so much easier, and I haven't necessarily done anything different, but I know them now, and I know what works and what doesn't. And I guess that's just kind of a word of encouragement for those new teachers, or maybe they haven't stayed at a campus for very long. But if you just stay a little while, it gets better.
Yes, absolutely. So a little bit about my program, because I think this will tie into what we're talking about. When I took over Caprock, we had 60, I believe it was 66 total in the entire program. And it just had never been a successful program. And honestly, in the history of the school, they had never had a sweepstakes, UIL sweepstakes. And I was, gung-ho about it. The year before, like I said, I was at Bowie, which was one of our feeders. So the afternoon I spent over here assisting the director that was here. When the job opened up, it was not a successful program. I was told by mentors and peers, don't take that program. You're never going to do anything with it. But I saw so much potential in the kids. There was potential here. I just think, and it's not that the director that was here was a bad teacher. I just think it was not the right fit.
Sure.
And she was, later on in her career. So, I think sometimes things just don't mesh. So I begged for this job. I begged my fine arts director. I said, I know I'm a brand new teacher. I know I only have a year and a half in. I'm going to go back and touch on this. You said your second year was harder than your first year. I came into the Bowie position. I was actually there for a year and a half. I came in at semester, and the director that was there before me laterally moved across town to another middle school position that came open in a more affluent community. And these kids were hurt. We got through the semester. It was not as bad as I thought it was going to be. And it was not as bad as I thought it was going to be, because I think I was riding on the coattails of what he had laid down foundationally. And it was the first full year that I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. So like that quote unquote second year for me, or the restart, it was a very difficult year. I also lost both my grandparents right before school started. So like everything just kind of, it was a perfect storm of not getting a great start to the school year, and thinking I knew what I was doing. I was like, oh, it's going to be better. And then it did not happen. So yes, like you said, I encourage people, stick it out. Your first year is, whether you've been teaching 1 year or 20 years, a first year somewhere is always going to be a first year. Um, so anyway, so that being said, I took over Caprock after that. We had success. It took 5 years to reach a goal that I set. I was like, we're going to get a sweepstakes. We're going to get a sweepstakes. My first year, we made not great scores. And I was devastated because I was like, I worked so hard. The kids worked so hard. Second year, we had improvement in scores, still no sweepstakes. And I'm just going to put it out there. I cried every year. I was always disappointed, and it was never disappointment in the kids. My disappointment was always in myself, that I was not good enough and I was not doing what was necessary or what I believed my students deserved. So I felt like I was failing them. So we kept going. And I think after the third year, I'm trying to be these other people. We have and had, because some of them have retired, some big choral giants in our area. And I think I was trying to be those people. But again, like I said, no two programs are alike. And I finally kind of said to myself, you've got to start doing things for yourself and making things fit. So that fourth year, we had a big improvement where I think it was a 2-2-1. So we were very close that year. And the fifth year is the year that I finally said to myself, okay, self, we really need to look at what we're not doing well. I think the downside to student teaching sometimes, depending on who your mentor is, when you observe, you are watching somebody that has been in the field for years. And so some of the processes that need to happen are happening, but they're happening in their head. They're happening, outside of maybe the time you sit down with that director and talk with them. And so they make it look so easy. Oh, well, you should just be able to do it. And one of the things that I admitted to myself is I'm not planning. I'm not planning like I should be planning. So that fifth year, from August all the way through the rest of the year, well, maybe until May, but that's, May's May. I said, I'm going to have a daily plan. I put it together on, not Google Slides. What was before Google Slides?
PowerPoint? Is that it?
PowerPoint. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I know I only use Google.
I'm so tired. Sorry. So I would use PowerPoint slides up on the screen. I had a big screen in my room, and they knew what we were doing every day. I knew what we were doing every day. And the progress we made that fifth year was pretty incredible. I think we made more progress in the first 6 weeks than I did in a semester my first couple of years. And so needless to say, that fifth year is when we got that first sweepstakes for varsity. And it was great. The kids were super excited. It was validation finally for myself that, okay, I'm on the right track. Because there were times that I was really going, maybe that person that thought I shouldn't be a music major, maybe they were right. Maybe it's time for me to find something else. So we got that sweepstakes. It was great. The next year we took 3 varsity groups, mixed men's and women's, and all 3 swept. And we've managed to keep a sweepstakes every year. Maybe not all 3. Bless my men. I love them. We'll get there. We're getting there. This year, I think we're going to do it. And our goal is to get a non-varsity. We still have yet to have a non-varsity sweep. They've gotten very close. Last year was so close. But these kids work hard. So part of our challenge here also, though, is that we've had a lot of turnover in our middle school. And I think the success at the high school is so tied to what is happening at our feeder schools. And I mean, there was a stretch of years where I had um, a different director at either campus. One campus has been a little bit more stable. So in my 16 years, I've only seen 3 directors there. So those kids come to me pretty solid. That being said, those kids, they're in their second year with a new director, and she's fantastic and she's sticking it out. And I think next year is going to be the year those kids buy into her. They really love the director before her. But my new director is doing an awesome job. My other feeder, the one that I taught at, we've had, I need to count again, in 16 years, I think it's been 10 directors. So, that turnover it takes a toll on the kids. There's not consistency. And so they're not getting the same foundations. Luckily, my director that's there now, he was actually my assistant for 3 years. And then the job came open in an unfortunate set of circumstances that I won't go into. And so it kind of turned into, we're either not going to have a director or you can have the program. And so he's an awesome team member. I'm not sure what I would do without him, but he took over that program and he's in his 3rd year over there. And it's really showing the consistency and just knowing the program, knowing the kids, and him having been up here first. I think he has a different outlook on how he runs his program now. And so he's just doing a great job over there. I'm super proud of both of them. I really do have a wonderful team now. And it's paying off. My varsity choir this year is the biggest it's ever been. I have 63, which is almost the size of the program that I started with. So we're sitting at, I believe, I think right over 160 this year for the program. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
With AP theory in there.
Wow, yeah, AP theory. That's always a good thing.
I don't teach that. My assistant does.
Yeah.
She's much smarter at that stuff than I am.
Now, so you said, I want to go back to what you said about, I think you said it was going into your 5th year. You said, okay, I really have to actually be willing and humble enough to look at, okay, well, what am I not doing right as far as, like you said, planning and all that kind of stuff. When you were doing that, so I mean, obviously you said planning was one of the biggest ones. Do you feel like that was the majority of what was, that last little bit you needed to go that final bit, or were there any other areas that you felt like you were struggling in that you needed to improve going into that year?
Oh gosh, yes to all. Yes, all of it. I think it was the final push in having efficient rehearsals. I was rehearsing my kids and we were working bell to bell, but I don't think my teaching was efficient. It wasn't a good use of the time. And, I'm never going to claim to be the smartest musician or the most talented. And I think I needed that structure to kind of do the checklist of, okay, we've got notes and words, we've got, now we've got to do dynamics. Whereas I was kind of just wandering through the music and hoping it would come together. And so I think that planning really focused my teaching into what those kids were looking for and what they needed to let them dig a little deeper into that music. So, I think it just kind of filled in some of those gaps that I was missing. And it gave me a different perspective on how I was approaching the music. These kids grew every year, and I think I needed something to take me out of teaching the same group that I inherited, if that makes sense. So, when I first started here at Caprock, we started very basic. This is a quarter note. This is, I have a note packet still that we use. I've given it to my middle school folks. They're using it now, but there's a note packet I call choir notes. Haha. So, and it just goes through basic music theory stuff. And I think once I got them trained and taught on that stuff, I didn't know what the next step was. So it was that, I need to get ahead. I need to take one more step further. And also holding myself accountable to the belief that they can do it. I think I was scared to give them something more challenging because there was still a little bit of that belief of, can they do it?
Yeah.
And then the other side of that would be, can I do it? And so, yeah, the planning was really helpful to me to stay ahead of them. It, it might have been just one step ahead of them, but we kept each other going. So, that I think it helped just push us over the edge.
Well, no, I think it's really, really big what you said just about how it's all of those little things that really work when it comes to efficiency in the rehearsal, right? That make a big difference in the long run. It's those kinds of things. This is something that I'm constantly learning about when it comes to my business as a composer. And there's a difference between the times that I'm writing music and trying to promote my business when I have set up systems on how I do those things. And it could be something as simple as an automated email or a template for an email, right? That I send out, in fact, I think I had emailed you, a while back when you had first scheduled this interview. There was like an email I sent with just saying, hey, thanks for signing up. Here's an outline of kind of what the interview process will look like. Well, that whole thing was like a template email that I could just hit a button and it filled all that in for me. And that's just an example of a little thing that makes the job a little bit more efficient. And on its face, it doesn't seem like a huge difference because maybe I could have just typed it out real quick. But over time, when you think about it, all those little pieces of time, all that little bit of effort over time actually makes a big difference. And so whenever you have a bunch of things like that set up, it can actually it helps you focus more on the main thing you're actually wanting to do, like writing music for me or teaching for you or Kara, that kind of stuff.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to piggyback on that and say, if you if you are teaching and you type something up, save it and use it later, or don't use it later, but it's there for you to use. Just like you said, an email. For me, it's event letters. We have certain events that are traditional in our program now. We do them every year. And so I go back to last year's, letter for like the retreat that we just did yesterday. That's a big event for us. I just revamped, I changed what I need to change, but I didn't have to type up everything again. And if you have a fellow director somewhere that can send you something, hey, this is what I'm looking at doing. Do you have something that you use? Hopefully you have somebody that's not hesitant to share stuff with you, and you can revamp and make it your own. So my best friend is also a choir director, and so she and I do that for each other all the time. She's like, hey, do you have this? I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, do you have this? She'll send it to me. So we feed off of each other all the time.
Well, and it's like, why do the work when someone else has done it for you, right? And
Yes.
that's just called being smart, right? It's not
smarter, not harder.
Exactly. Yeah, work
Exactly.
smarter, not harder.
Exactly.
Another thing with that too is I find with myself when I'm setting up those kinds of things, it can be hard sometimes because typically when you're deliberately setting something up with the purpose of, okay, I want to be able to, use this again and again in the future. You want to make sure it's, exactly the way you want it to be so that you don't have to worry about, there being things you want to change drastically later. And so it's easier for it to, it's going to take a little bit longer sometimes to set that up on the, early on in that process. But then the whole point of that is, it takes a while to set up, but the whole point is so that later it takes less time. And so sometimes I find myself like, oh, well, I have to set up this whole thing and oh, it's just going to take forever. But you just have to remind yourself like, oh, wait, well, this is actually I want to be so glad I did this later on, even though I don't necessarily feel like doing it right now.
Yes, absolutely.
I want to go back to what you said about, you were talking about going into the music profession and going into university or whatever that might look like, someone who wants to take, do music as their career. And you said something along the lines of you want to be able to love music so much that you can study it and analyze it and do everything to where you almost hate it at times. I think that's so, so true. What would you say to someone that is going through that process right now and maybe they're in the middle of, I mean, it doesn't even have to be in college, right? I mean, it could be, good, well into their career as a music teacher, and it's just getting tiring and things like that. I mean, what would you say to someone that is feeling that way and they're not sure, like, well, is this still meant for me, or is it just different now? Or, I mean, what would you say to that?
I think, first of all, we need to prepare ourselves for it to be different. You're, I'm going to speak from a choir standpoint just because that's my
Sure.
that's my experience. My experience as a choir student is what got me into being a music major. However, my role now as a director is very different than that experience. And I don't think most, or at least not the folks that I talked to recently, I don't think there's a lot of universities or mentors that are prepping these students for that role switch. It is a huge role switch that I don't think folks are ready for. Again, we enjoyed being on the risers, we enjoyed singing, we enjoyed performing this music. We want our kids to have that same experience, except a lot of times we don't know what went into that. I'm going to use an example from our retreat yesterday. I have a leadership team. My goal this year is to utilize my leadership team more effectively. In the past, we kind of had the titles and they would help here and there, and then it would kind of wane off. And then I ended up doing everything by myself again. So it just got very frustrating. So one of the things I told them for this year is I want you to lead some activities at our retreat tomorrow. That should be one of the things that our leadership team does. So in our last meeting, I said, they had an assignment of bringing me 2 to 3 activities that they wanted to do with the group. I tried to walk them through it. I said, I want you to walk me through exactly how you're going to do this, how it's going to work. And it was, oh, miss, we got this, no, it's just this, it's not hard. And I kept pushing them, and I was like, I need you to walk me through it. And finally, they were so confident that they had it. I said, okay, I'm going to trust you, and you're going to have this. Well, what happened yesterday is they did not have it. First of all, it was a huge group, and that was something that I was unprepared for, is having 90 something kids at this retreat. The most we've ever had is 70. So it was an insanely large group, which was great. I loved it. It was a great day. But, these students, they're high school students. They were not prepared to stand in front of that big group. So I probably could have been a little bit more focused in my instruction with them, but also they should have trusted that my suggestions to them were really important. So, yeah. And what I noticed is their nerves got the best of them because they're kids. And I stepped in, by the way. I'm not a horrible person. I did step in and help them. I was like, hey, this is what they're trying to get you to do, But I think the charisma and the ability to think on your feet, the quickness of trying to turn around the vibe in the room, and just you being excited about what you're doing is so important to getting these kids bought in. So the first activity they did, we broke up into 4 sections because it was just easier to do these in smaller groups instead of a group of 90. And so each one of them went to, one went to the sopranos, one went to the altos, one went to the tenors. I took the basses because basses are basses. I was like, I will take the basses. And what I noticed is they started to kind of fall into this, I don't want to do this. But as I got more excited about the activity, my group got more excited about the activity. Then the group next to us got more excited about the activity. And so one of the things that I plan on talking with them in our next meeting is, hey, what are some of the things that you did not expect to happen at that retreat? And just maybe gearing their minds towards, it's not just doing something and doing activity for the sake of doing the activity. It's how you approach it, and the energy that you approach it with is so important, that to have that infectious nature to it, that everybody starts buying in. I think sometimes we forget some of those levels. If we're scared and we're not sure how they're gonna react, if we're nervous about it, they're not going to buy in.
Well, and I think something that what I've started to observe and notice, and this is just my opinion based on some of my observations, but and so I may not be fully right on this. However, I think what's interesting is that, nowadays we live in a world where we have so much technology and knowledge and resources that are there to help us make our lives easier, right? And I feel like I feel like nowadays it's easy for me, and even especially the younger generation, to who have grown up with those things now, to, we've grown up expecting things to just be easier for us, right? We expect things to be instantaneous, and we shouldn't have to work super hard for them. But the irony is that I feel like actually, because of those things that are available to us now, it actually raises the expectation for us to be able to do more. Because it's, when you live in a world where there is more immediately available to you, well, then you're expected to do more. And so it's easy to come into a setting like that, or a setting like a university and things like that, to come in expecting everything to just kind of be handed to you. And that's how it works. When the reality is, well, you're going to get as much out of it that you put into it. And in fact, now, because there's so many more helpful tools available to you, you should actually be able to do even more than what we could have done in the past. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to take responsibility for that and get out of it what you put in. That's something that I feel like I personally didn't really understand until, halfway through college was, well, it doesn't really matter what school you go to. They're going to give you information, but it's up to me to actually apply it and practice it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, I think that was one of the turning points for me in teaching. And with that planning thing that I did that 5th year, I became more confident because I knew what I was doing. I wasn't blindly trying to lead us to the next thing. So that confidence also spilled over into those kids. And so, yes, it's just we all feed off of each other. You just have to decide who's going to be the leader of that energy. Is it going to be you, or is it going to be the student that maybe doesn't want to be there? And it needs to be you.
Definitely. And as teachers and as mentors, we're the ones that are stewards of giving them the ability to do that, not necessarily doing it for them. Well, cool. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. I think that's a great way to kind of wrap it up. But before we do that, is there anything else that you really want to you might want to mention or talk about that you'd like to mention on here?
Yeah, actually, I want to mention, you've got to, as a director, I think you need to find a way to keep you connected to being the performer. The last couple of years, I've been a part of the High Plains Choral Society, which is kind of a semi-professional audition group that we've started up here. And being back on the other side of the podium has really changed how I'm teaching in the classroom. It's great to watch. Brandon is actually our director, our artistic director for that group. And it's great to watch him and go, I need to be doing that with my group. Or, sometimes he gets on a rant and gets talking for a little bit. I'm like, I need to remember to limit myself, because I do the same thing. We all do. We want to tell our kids or tell our choir all of the things that we know to make them better. It's out of the desire to want to make them better. And so I encourage anyone that is teaching, and I know it's hard. Our energy and time is limited, especially when you're leading a program. But I think it's a good payoff to it keeps your soul fed in a different way. We get our souls fed by leading our students in one way, but we also need to remind ourselves why we got into this. And I think so many times we get into the profession and we just forget, maybe you're not singing in a church choir. Maybe you don't have a community choir. Find a way to make that happen. Even if it's just a group of you and your fellow directors, you just get together and sing through some stuff every so often. Find a way to feed that part of your soul, because it will help keep you going in the classroom.
And we've said it many times on this show already, and we'll say it again. We'll say it as many times as we need to. You don't have to perform, but you get to perform. That's so important to
absolutely
exactly
yep.
to just keep reminding yourself when you have those opportunities, take them, because you'll regret it later. Cool. Well, thank you so much. Kara actually had to step out again. Poor thing, she's not feeling very well, so I'm about to go
I'm
check
so
on
sorry.
her. Yeah, but yeah, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. Before we go, is there any way that our listeners can connect with you or your choir?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook because I'm part of that generation. That's what I have. I have an Instagram, but I'm gonna be honest, I don't check
Yeah.
it. But you can find Caprock Choir on Facebook and Instagram. I do post on the choir Instagram.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. We really appreciate it. It was a great conversation, and we'll have to have you again sometime.
Great, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Beyond the Measure, a podcast for music educators. We hope you learned something that will help you stress less about how to teach so that you can focus more on who you're teaching. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a rating and review, subscribe, and share this podcast with other music educators. See you in the next one.